Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we're tuning into a session from Winter Institute 2019 called Why James Baldwin Always Matters.
I'm Lisa from the National Book Foundation, and we today are going to be talking about Baldwin. So the National Book Foundation presents the National Book Awards, as you all likely know, and this is an event talking about an author who has not won a National Book Award or been nominated for a National Book Award in quite some time. And we spent a lot of the time that we've been at Winter Institute over the past couple of years and talking to booksellers, talking about like, how do we sell this year's National Book Award finalists, long lists, winners? How do we think about those authors? How do we think about 5 Under 35, another program that we do? But we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the dozens and dozens and dozens of writers that have won or been nominated for National Book Awards throughout history. And so we launched this program this year called Author in Focus. And we hope to keep doing it every year, where we focus on someone who's been in the National Book Award family over time that is an important author that we want to take a look at, right? So the idea that we're here to teach you how to sell Baldwin seems ridiculous, right? Like, you guys all love Baldwin. It's like kind of a dumb idea, but it's not, I think. I think that there are all these interesting ways that literature changes over time, ways that we can talk to new audiences about how to read authors that we know are famous or iconic, ways that we can frame, contextualize, highlight those authors in stores and libraries, in schools, in our lives, on our own bookshelves, right? And so this program is really designed to just have some good conversation about, are we selling Baldwin well? Are we framing his work well? Are we bringing new young authors into the fold? Are we focusing on Are we focusing on Beale Street, right? Is there a movie tie-in and like that's the beginning and the end? Are we only giving Giovanni's room to somebody who seems like they need Giovanni's room? But what does the whole body of work mean? What does it mean on our shelves? You know, do we sell Baldwin like we sell Faulkner? You know, is he as well represented on a shelf of a bookstore, right? Or more? But, you know, is it, when we do displays, who are we putting Baldwin next to, right? So these are just some of the conversations. And the assumption is not that you all are not selling Baldwin, right? Like, raise your hand if you're not. And we'll go have a talk over on the side. So just a couple quick things. We're really excited to be here. This is the first time we partnered in this way with Winter Institute, with ABA. So we're really excited and grateful, and like gratitude always to Oren and to Joy and the whole team. This program is made possible by the filmmaker Raoul Peck, who made the film I Am Not Your Negro, which will be actually screening this evening if you want to see it. It's a great film if you haven't. An interesting film. Definitely something that sparks a lot of conversation around like how we present Baldwin and his work. And Ford Foundation, who gave Raoul funding to make sure that more people were reading Baldwin, not just watching the film. So today we have some very wonderful panelists who I will introduce. Here we go. We have Robin Koss-Lewis, who is the author of Voyage of the Sable Venus, published by Knopf in 2015, who's a National Book Award winner. She is a Provost Fellow in Poetry and Visual Studies at the University of Southern California. Lewis is also a Cave Canem Fellow and a Fellow of the Los Angeles Institute for the Humanities. Lewis was born in Compton, California. Her family is from New Orleans. Casey Gerald is here too, and he is the author of the critically acclaimed memoir, There Will Be No Miracles Here. A native of Oak Cliff, Texas, Gerald was educated at Yale College and Harvard Business School. Gerald has been featured in the New York Times, which selected, TWBNMH. That's the acronym that's here for the book. There Will Be No Miracles Here. TWBNMH. As one of the 100 notable books of 2018 in O Magazine, on MSNBC, PBS, and other outlets. And our moderator is Hannah Oliver Depp, a career bookseller who is currently opening Loyalty Bookstores, an intersectional feminist bookstore, cafe, and co-working space with locations in Washington, D.C. and Silver Spring, Maryland. Oliver Depp is also a founding member of Indies Forward and the American Bookselling Association Diversity Task Force. And now I will shut up and leave it to them. Thank you all so much. Oh, one quick thing. There are free books, free Baldwin, over there, in case you don't have enough on your shelves at your bookstore. But you can give them to people. You can always re-gift a book.
Thank you all so much for coming. I'm very excited. You're not actually going to hear that much from me because I just wanted to say quickly a quick thank you to our wonderful sponsor for this event, Ingram. We all use Ingram every day in our business, and we celebrate them celebrating us. Seems like a great relationship. And on that note, also the author reception tonight. Please do not miss that. It is a great chance to meet some incredible authors whose names you know and some that you do not. It is from 5 to 6:30 tonight. And then if you just can't get enough Baldwin, because of course you cannot, there will be this screening tonight at 9:30 at the Chemo Theater. Thank you. Auditorium. 7:30. So that will be a little bit less bookseller focused, more Baldwin focused in the greater scheme of him and culture. So more Baldwin, more fun. So I just wanted to talk tonight. I'm actually amazed right now because sitting here, do you mind? My first encounter with Baldwin was not in a classroom. I unfortunately didn't encounter him till very late in my technical education, but in a used bookstore, and I encountered this copy of Giovanni's Room, and it's gorgeous and strange, and I'm a sucker for old yellowed mass markets, and so I picked it up, and I was 12, and I didn't really know what I was reading. I was 12. And needless to say, my mind was blown, and reread it since then because it's a journey every time you reread Baldwin, no matter what, but especially the difference between 12 and 20 is kind of substantial. But I just remember feeling seared, I think is the word I used with him often. He's searing and present, and getting into the nonfiction seems like it was written yesterday, which is both wonderful and terrible in a variety of ways. And if it hadn't been, sitting faced out on a shelf in a used bookstore that I liked to explore, I don't know, I would have been in college, maybe, when I encountered him. And that's a terrifying thought, honestly. And when I make displays in the bookstore, any excuse I have to put Baldwin in, I do. And I think constantly about where he is shelved and how we can bring him better together. Because if you shelve by strict categories, he'd be all over the place. And then what if they don't find him? But to, think about why these searing words matter, Robin was going to open with a little bit of a reading.
I'm going to read a few paragraphs. Oops, sorry, you guys. Can you guys hear me, or you need the mic?
Yeah, they're recording.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I'm going to read. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. No, it's okay. Oh, okay. Thanks. Service with a smile. Can everyone hear me now? Yeah? I'm going to read a few paragraphs from the beginning of The Devil Finds Work. I'm going to read a couple paragraphs and then skip and read a couple paragraphs more, okay? So he starts The Devil Finds Work with, "For our God is a consuming fire," which is from Hebrews. That's the epigraph. 1. Congo Square. Joan Crawford's straight, narrow, and lonely back. Period. We are following her through the corridors of a moving train. She is looking for someone, or she is trying to escape from someone. She is eventually intercepted by, I think, Clark Gable. I am fascinated by the movement on and off the screen, that movement which is something like the heaving and swelling of the sea, though I have not yet been to the sea, and which is also something like the light which moves on and especially beneath the water. I am about 7. I am with my mother or my aunt. The movie is Dance, Fools, Dance. I don't remember the film. A child is far too self-centered to relate to any dilemma which does not somehow relate to him, to his own evolving dilemma. The child escapes into what he would like his situation to be, and I certainly did not wish to be a fleeing fugitive on a moving train. And also, with quite another part of my mind, I was aware that Joan Crawford was a white lady. Yet I remember being sent into the store sometime later, and a colored woman who, to me, looked exactly like Joan Crawford, was buying something. She was so incredibly beautiful. She seemed to me to be wearing the sunlight, rearranging it around her from time to time, with a movement of one hand, with a movement of her head, and with her smile that, when she paid the man and started out of the store, I started out behind her. The storekeeper who knew me and others in the store who knew my mother's little boy and who also knew my Miss Crawford laughed and called me back. Miss Crawford also laughed and looked down at me with so beautiful a smile that I was not even embarrassed, which was rare for me. And then a few paragraphs later, my father said during all the years I lived with him that I was the ugliest boy he had ever seen, and I had absolutely no reason to doubt him. But it was not my father's hatred of my frog eyes which hurt me, this hatred proving in time to be rather more resounding than real. I have my mother's eyes. When my father called me ugly, he was not attacking me so much as he was attacking my mother. No doubt he was also attacking my real and unknown father. And I loved my mother. I knew that she loved me, and I sensed that she was paying an enormous price for me. I was a boy, and so I didn't really too much care that my father thought me hideous. So I said to myself, this judgment nevertheless was to have a decidedly terrifying effect on my life. But I thought that he must have been stricken blind, or was as mysteriously wicked as white people. A paralyzing thought. If he was unable to see that my mother was absolutely, beyond any question, the most beautiful woman in the world.
Thank you.
Sure.
Again, searing and angry crying, and like the reaction I have to that is so profoundly physical sometimes. I'm curious to kick it off talking about your work and how Baldwin intersects with that and folds into that. It seems almost, inescapable. I see in Voyage to Sable Venus the way that he thinks about Black women is all over the pages. In your criticism of our culture, Casey, I feel it echoes pretty profoundly, and not letting us get away with whitewashing ourselves and being comfortable in whiteness. Would you both like to discuss how Baldwin and you came together?
Certainly. Like you, Casey and I were talking about this last night. Giovanni's Room was the first Baldwin novel I ever read, also as a teenager. We were also talking about the remarkable fact that it was published in the late 50s or mid-50s, 1954. Think about that for a minute, you guys who haven't thought about that for a while. In 1954, at the height of such extraordinarily heinous race relations in America, a Black man, a genius, wrote a book that was not set in America, right? Let's just start there, right? So not giving into the isolationist ideas of what a American writer should be doing, way before it was fashionable. And his protagonist was a white man in Europe who, was the embodiment of the purest desire I've ever seen, I think, on the page. So that, like you, destroyed me, but destroyed me with its clarity in terms of project and its carriage and its gestures and its refusal to engage all the expectations that are horribly placed upon Black writers to perform a little do-si-do shuffle off to Buffalo minstrel show, right? That he refused that so searingly in 1954 was profound to me. It opened up so many possibilities of, why not start in another country, right? Why not?
I had actually a very false start with Baldwin. I didn't encounter him until I was a freshman in college. I didn't read growing up. Last book I remember reading as a child was The Boxcar Children. I was 10 or so. And nobody around me read, which does not mean we didn't get vital information, you see. And so I got to college, and I had a very violent reaction to Yale and an even more violent reaction to Black people at Yale. And I think which is a proxy for saying I had a violent reaction to Black people who were not poor, which I did not realize I had been until I got to Yale. And I took a class, the only African American Studies class I had in college, which Elizabeth Alexander, who hopefully you all are selling also, went on to teach. She was not, unfortunately, teaching it my freshman year. So I had a different professor, and we were assigned Notes of a Native Son. And I started to read it, and it was interesting. And I was thinking this morning, I don't know whether I closed it simply because all the Black people that I already disliked liked it so much. I don't know if I disliked, you see what I'm saying? I don't know that I punished Baldwin for my feelings about these other people, or because, which I think is closer to the truth, I didn't feel that I needed to have explained to me what it was like to be a poor Black faggot. You see what I'm saying? I didn't need that, actually. At 18, nor do I need it at 32. So I think it's very interesting, this question of how do we sell Baldwin? I suppose the fundamental question is, who are we selling Baldwin to? My grandmother doesn't need to know what it's like to be a poor Black woman. Perhaps she needs to know something else, or perhaps there's some comfort in reading that. So I put Baldwin away for a long time. I saw, the first time I liked him a great deal was watching The Price of the Ticket. And it was an extraordinary, different documentary than I'm Not Your Negro. But there was something about him. It was around the time I realized that I was going to have to completely sort of make myself up in a way, become somewhat of a fabrication if I was going to make it through Yale and make it through life writ large. And Baldwin was the first. I hadn't really come across people like Maya Angelou or Nina Simone or Eartha Kitt, all these Southern Black people who really just kind of made themselves up out of the blue. And so seeing Baldwin on The Price of the Ticket was a revelation. And I remember that scene. He says, there are days when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. And I had never wondered any of those things, but I didn't really care what he was saying. It was the question. It was the performance. And so much of that, I think, again, to the question of how we sell Baldwin, I think we ought to sell him more as an artist, perhaps one of the greatest American artists in the history of the society, and definitely one of the greatest literary artists in the history of the English language. So that's that. So then it gets to Giovanni's Room. I was 24, and I had found myself with certain decisions to make as to my life. And I came across Giovanni's Room. And Lisa, you said, do we give Giovanni's Room to the people who need Giovanni's Room, and that's it? What a profound gift. If all we did was give Giovanni's Room to the people who need Giovanni's Room. I do believe it saved my life, and I think it saved a great many lives, actually. And if that's the only book of Baldwin's we sell, I think there are worse things we could do. And there was a passage in there that I keep trying to convince myself to tattoo on my arm, but I don't have the courage that Robin has. And it's towards the middle of the deal, roughly, and the barman is trying to get David to wake up. And he says, people can't unhappily invent their friends, their mooring posts, their friends, their lovers, any more than they can invent their parents. Yes. Life gives these, and life also takes them away. And the great difficulty is to say yes to life. Yes. If that's the only passage of Baldwin we give to people, I mean, you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So I start this from a profound place of gratitude for the example of courage. And I don't think you have, two Black queer artists sitting on one stage in fucking Albuquerque, New Mexico, without James Baldwin sitting in that little chateau in Switzerland alone with Bessie Smith. Bessie Smith, yeah.
Can I just comment one thing? So, so much of what Casey just said was so profound and engaging. I didn't read, the thing about I didn't need to read Baldwin because I already know what it felt like to be these things. that's not what, for me, I think that's interesting. There's a particular kind of divine pleasure, however, when I do read him, to see Black characters after I was born in '64. So all of you guys know what that means in terms of curriculum and pedagogy. And I didn't see a Black author until I was in college, right? And rather frighteningly so. I just finished my PhD at USC a few years ago, and I did 2 other graduate degrees. I didn't see a Black author put in front of me for a PhD in the 2000s. So let's not fool ourselves that we're in some lovely place of safety and comfort in terms of our curriculum and pedagogy and what diversity or inclusion means on our syllabi and therefore your book orders, right? But having said that, the reason why I didn't care about the Black people in Baldwin, although extraordinarily complex, lush characters, the reason why I went to Baldwin, and maybe we're saying the same thing and I'm saying it differently, was what he was doing to English. You know, Baldwin said, silence is a language that all Black people speak fluently, right? And he didn't mean it as, he doesn't conceive of silence as a powerless thing. Right? Your silence would not protect you, all of that rhetoric that would come later after the Civil Rights Movement. He thought about silence as immense power. And to see him play with silence and timing in his syntax and his grammar was what blew my mind, right? I was like, I didn't know you could take English and go, I didn't know you got to do that. Sorry, I know it's a beautiful program. But artists sacrifice beautiful things every day. I didn't know that you got to take something that had been used to indoctrinate us into, or an attempt to indoctrinate us into submission, right? Subject, verb, object. Comma here, no run-ons, no fragments. I didn't know you could take all of this profound indoctrination, right? And then just spit it out and go, and here's why. And spit it out in such a way that it made you ashamed for what English had been before. That's what Baldwin gave to me. And that he did so while putting those Englishes, right? And there are many Englishes that Baldwin uses, which is something we also don't talk about, putting those English in so many different bodies on the page, right? What he did with the period, what he did with the comma, you know, how and then I'll stop. I'm sorry, I can go on forever. And that he refused in every book, every essay. I am not sure. Anyway, he refused in every way to perform the projection of the Black male author for any reader, not just white readers, any reader, right? He refused that. And not only that, he would turn around and say, right, with profound tenderness, it's on every page, you know, there is no kind of noble folk Black character in any book Baldwin has ever read. The reader does not get to have their erotic experience of pity for the Black body, not ever. Don't bring your pity to Baldwin's work because you don't get to work it out there, right? He will then, and the way he does that, which is remarkable as a writer to watch him do, and I agree, one of the most extraordinary American artists, period, zero, zilch, top 5 for me, right? He does it with vulnerability, an aesthetic vulnerability that is profound. I'm afraid, I'm broken, we're broken, life is breaking us, right? Life is tender, we're alone. I mean, his whole kind of representation of the importance of solitude and loneliness and isolation, right? I mean, talk about if there's any American writer who knows what it means to be American or knows how to write truly what America is in terms of the loneliness and the myth of democracy and how the myth of democracy makes us into these, you know, now postmodern, completely fragmented beings. It was Baldwin. And that's for me what's so important about his English and what he just goes, I mean, I'm sorry to blow up the program, Lisa, but it's a remarkable feat after centuries, right, of watching so many writers from all over the country and so many contexts grapple with English. I'm thinking about Phyllis Wheatley. I'm thinking about Frederick Douglass. Grapple with the undue, heinous expectation that they have to parrot colonial American English, right? To watch a writer come along and go, I'm not doing that. at all. Here's what I'm going to do, right? The reason why I also wanted to read the beginning of the Devil Finds Work is that it starts in media res, and it's about Joan Crawford and him watching the TV and the light dapple on the screen, right? Extraordinary.
That brings to mind, I want to clarify that 18-year-old me, if you read my book, you see 18-year-old me is not to be trusted as it relates to his judgments about it.
Right,
about anything. And the question is, and this actually is very important as it relates to, again, the question we're going to ask. It wasn't time for me
Exactly.
to have,
Exactly.
to understand
Exactly.
and to appreciate.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And in your book, that's what's one. There's so many things about Casey's book. If you guys haven't read it, you should run and buy it. That's one of the things that reminds me, right, of this gesture that Baldwin also has. And it is an extraordinarily rare gift to say, actually, I'm not going to stand up here and be, this armored black man for you. I'm going to say, actually, I was at this point when I was 18. This is what I thought. This is what I believed. A true essayist, right? That lets you see the kind of development of one's mind and one's intellect over time on the page.
And trying to understand why that is. So you say again, where do you put him next? Who do you put him next to? I think Faulkner actually is a great sort of comp. There was an interview with Faulkner. I don't know if it was his Paris Review interview or somewhere. And somebody said, well, Mr. Faulkner, people say they read your work 3 times and they still don't understand it. What would you say to them? And Faulkner said, I tell them to read it again. I think Baldwin's first training is at the hands of a painter, Buford Delaney.
Exactly.
Yeah. Talk about intergenerational.
Exactly.
I mean, again, there is something very black, which must be understood. But so Buford Delaney, they're walking in New York City, and there had been rain recently, and there was a puddle, and they stand at the corner, and Buford says, well, Jimmy, look in that puddle and tell me what do you see. And Jimmy says, it's a puddle of water. And he says, look again. And he teaches Baldwin how to see by making him look in this rain puddle, and then he starts to see those little shimmers of color and his own face and all this kind of stuff. So if you, why I love that Robin started with The Devil Finds Work is that in some ways you sort of, people have been talking about Mary Oliver as, I love this correction of someone said yesterday, I saw someone say yesterday that people call her a nature poet. It's more accurate to call her a poet of attention. And I think it's a very similar thing with Baldwin. He just sees so much more beyond the surface of the human condition, and by virtue of that, our society. And so I think you keep, in some ways, the real question is, how do you represent? It's almost the question that a preacher has. My grandfather was a preacher. And, a preacher has a hard job. They got to tell a 2,000-year-old story over and over again and keep people from walking out on you. I mean, it's incredible. It's difficult. You as a bookseller actually kind of have a similar job. You got to sell the same shit over and over again and say, hey, y'all, this is, take another look at it.
Totally.
So there's so much there, and I love that Robin starts in the language because you actually don't have to spin Baldwin. You just have to present him.
He takes care of himself.
Speaking of that,
Can I just say one more thing about what you just said? Wait, back up.
Yeah.
I'm old. Back up. About the puddle, right? That Baldwin, that experience is also something that you don't see represented often in literature about Black writers, is how we develop aesthetically as artists, right? It's always this crazy fantasy of race, the tire around our neck. But I wanted to say Baldwin not only sees so meticulously, right, which is a gift, but he also fervently demands that you all, as a reader, admit that you see it too.
Yes.
That you stop pretending you don't see everything from the boy on the corner being killed by a black cop to the feather on a bird's wing at the windowsill outside your window.
Yes.
I mean, his gaze is just so right? And every moment it's like meticulous, right? Down that, span. And that's what I love about him, because he's like, yes, and the world, the whole universe is contained in this puddle now for me, and I'm going to give you an experience of seeing it. But he doesn't let you off the hook. He goes, and therefore you have to admit that you also see the magnificence and beauty and horror of the world every second of your life as well, and stop pretending.
I think that the note of pretending is what I wanted to come back to. I was raised by a white mother, and she was so committed to my Blackness that Blackness was performative. It was not rooted for me. And a lot of it was presenting Black writers that were, white approved Black writers, which can mean a variety of things, great and small. And finding Baldwin illicitly and his complete lack of performance and his demands, I think, as I unpack it, have influenced who I have chosen to trust and who I have not chosen to trust as a reader for the rest of my life. And gave me a language to have conversations with her about, her commitment to me understanding my roots, from a very specific, wonderfully well-intentioned liberal 1960s white woman's perspective, cherished, loved, but not known. In the way that Baldwin allows you to be known, because he won't let you be anything else. And I am curious, when I think as a bookseller, when I get a chance to give somebody Giovanni's Room, maybe it's on their high school reading list, maybe they've done a little Googling on the side for Black queer writers. And then I tend to ping over our stores when I think about the physical outline of our stores, because I'm trying to find equivalent truths almost to give them. Maybe I'm finding your books. Maybe they found him through poetry. Maybe they found him through essay. And I find people who are Black. I find people who are white. I find people who are international writers a lot of the times. And I think a lot about how our stores are wonderful physical places of exploration, but I also think about how in that way they are almost limiting, because we are so committed to our categories. And this is maybe not the right question to ask the two authors as opposed to a group of booksellers, but if you were to come into a bookstore, where would you want to find Baldwin, and who would you want to find him with?
Ooh, can I just start, because I'm done?
You can do whatever you want to. Do whatever the hell you want to, Robin.
I told him this morning, we just met last night, I was like, I'm adopting you, you're my new
brother.
brother.
She saw the loneliness and despair in my eyes.
That is so necessary to be a good artist.
Yeah. Sorry, okay, all right.
No, I'm saying loneliness, Baldwin talks about this, essay we don't talk enough about in the creative process.
He does.
That the condition that every artist must cultivate is the condition of being alone.
Yeah.
And that that sensation that most people run away from, we must run towards. Which is, it's a very difficult thing. We don't talk about this enough, like the psychological toll of isolation in order to write it's real. And it's also sublime, right? It's sublime. So that's what I meant. Sorry if it was a little bit
No, it was very real.
See, I'm too old. You guys keep doing this to me.
Where would you like to see Baldwin when you walk in the store?
So one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about Faulkner, and what I was thinking about reading The Devil Finds Work All Over Again, is immediately I thought of Grace Paley, right? Who's one of the badass short story writers that have ever walked the face of the earth. And the reason why I thought about Grace Paley, besides the fact that she is not going to waste the reader's time by pretending to be anything or having her characters pretend to be everything, is her, I know you guys are thinking I'm going to say her awareness about class. I'll come to that. That's a given, right? But her crazy, mercurial, and absolutely floorless but solid plots. Right? Baldwin does the same thing in his essays. You don't know where the hell he's going. Yeah. You don't know. And then suddenly you're like, wait, what? Well, how did we get here? But when you get to the place that he has gone around the corner to go next door, as they say down south, to get there, you were like, that was absolutely the best trajectory ever. But you didn't know that until he took you on that trip. I feel like Grace Paley does that with her short story plots. Also, it starts on fire. And I don't mean, when I say fire, I'm talking aesthetic fire. I'm not talking necessarily political fire. I'm talking about rhetorical gesture. He starts on fire from the first words, like, what I just read to you about Joan Crawford, Straight, Narrow, and Lonely Back. That's the first period. There's a period, okay? Joan Crawford, Straight, Narrow, and Lonely Back. That's the first sentence of the Double Fine's work. Right? It starts on fire, in media res. You have to catch up with him. Grace Paley does the same thing. Who else would I put him in? In Aimé Césaire. I mean, my idea of who to put together is a very eclectic idea, because I feel like, and I know you guys know this far better than I ever will, I feel like the categories in which we shelve, there's all this great scholarship being done on the Dewey Decimal System and all of these things now. It's antiquated in a lot of ways. What if we shelved authors by how they used a comma? Imagine. You guys think I'm joking. I'm so serious. And I know I'm not doing
war between Oxford and non-Oxford commentators.
Oh God. That's just, or, by houses, right? To see what house published, what if you put a whole list on the shelf? But I wanted to say something about the question, what if everyone read James Baldwin? I was talking to Lisa just before we got up here. It's like, what if we had a year of reading Baldwin, the whole country? What if we did that? And why can't we do that every year? The same way that cities do, we're going to read a book for the year. Why don't we read an author for a year? And what if your bookstore said to your readers who come into your stores, we're going to read James Baldwin for the year. Here are all the books. Here's the order. And come once a month, and we're going to talk about this book each month. I'm telling you, you would have a much more enlivened readership by your customers. That's an extraordinary practice. Sometimes I choose a country. I read only work from that country for a year. Or sometimes I only read women writers from that country for a year, right? And I go all over the world. Sometimes I'll spin the globe and go, wherever it lands, that's what I'm reading, right? It's extraordinary. You can always do things like that as opposed to, putting Baldwin on the table.
I think of a couple of things.
Hilton House. Hilton House.
Yeah. In terms of putting them.
And putting
yes,
out Hilton and Baldwin are Hilton's Baldwin's love child.
Yes.
No lie.
Yeah. I think of him in relation to, I live in Los Angeles. Well, we both live in Los Angeles. I think of him in relation to someone like Joan Didion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think the care at the level, the care and surprise at the level of the sentence in both of them is superb. I think what Baldwin does that, at the risk of being shot, Joan does not, is sort of, Baldwin gives us the so what. Yeah. He's not just saying, okay, well, look at the puddle and see this thing, and I had on the black chiffon dress, and I was going to get a divorce. He says, and this is why this is what this means and why it matters. You see, I mean, he sort of that's like
and this is how the water got here, and this is who has to clean it up.
He there's something in, and this is why Baldwin, in some ways, reminds me most, especially in his novels, of Dostoevsky more than any other American novelist, because there's a certain provincialism in the way Americans see themselves and the world and life that Baldwin resists. Yeah. And he's always pulling you out of the provincial, even if it's the provincial of the category of yourself. I think the other thing that really interests me, and again, going to the question of what if everybody read James Baldwin, I think perhaps a question that I had was, what if everybody, instead of reading James Baldwin, read the people that Baldwin was in conversation with, most of whom, gracefully, were black women? What if everybody bought Notes of a Native Son, and, glued to it was Audre Lorde, or glued to it? You talk about courage. I mean, it's one thing that Baldwin published Giovanni's Room. Zora Neale Hurston was not even allowed to publish Barracoon in her lifetime because she refused to water down Cujo. You see what I'm saying? So I think Baldwin's greatest gift is that he brings us to other people, starting with ourselves. He brings us to ourselves. he brings us to a deeper understanding of our country. I actually was thinking I was talking to Robin this morning about Voltaire. I think you compare the comp, I think in some ways, and I've been very struck by this, somebody said, a reviewer said, reviewed my and Casey Lehman's books together, and they said, 2 new black memoirs. And I said, well, what in the hell is a black memoir? I mean, it's a very strange, I think in some ways the problem is less the writer and more the people who decide to make the categories. I would be much more interested to walk in a bookstore and see Baldwin with Voltaire and Dostoevsky and Joan Didion and Audre Lorde. That's interesting to me.
Right.
Then you have grasped
Right.
the
Right.
the gravity
Right.
of what these people are doing.
Right. Absolutely.
And then sneak in Essex Hemphill. And you see what I'm saying? I mean,
Right, and also
let's
his
not-
best friend Lorraine Hansberry.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Sneak
I mean,
in
that
Lorraine.
friendship between the two of them was extraordinary.
So
go ahead.
I think Baldwin begs us to not be lazy. I read these by the books, and I saw somebody who was a very legitimate person in American public life who walked down and he said, I haven't been able to get to Toni Morrison. And I said, well, what in the fuck have you been doing? I mean, it's very strange. Now, he's gotten to all, I didn't read Hemingway when I was a child, or I read my first Hemingway. I said, God, I'm glad I didn't rush to this. I mean, nothing. I mean, I guess that is something against Hemingway, but I think Baldwin asks us, not to be lazy. And I think the question is not, what if everybody read James Baldwin? I think the question at this hour in America is, what if everybody believed James Baldwin? And understood what James Baldwin was trying to get us to see, and more importantly, trying to get us to do and commit to and disabuse ourselves of. He is fundamentally, I believe, and this is why I compare him to Dostoevsky, a religious writer.
Yes.
He is a deeply
Absolutely.
spiritual writer.
Absolutely.
I mean, I know we get all sort of excited about this idea of a black atheist. But Baldwin left the church. That has nothing to do with Baldwin leaving some notion of the divine, and he's always grappling with that. Mm-hmm. And so I think similarly, Jesus says somebody said, faith without works is dead. You can read James Baldwin all you want to. If you don't do nothing different, then you've wasted a lot of time. Oh, I will read. Yeah. This goes again to the point about when you come to certain things and how we might represent the same old stories. I didn't even hear of Another Country, I don't think, until maybe I was 25, 26. And I read it. One other thing I'll compare, you compare, I think of, you can't understand Baldwin without understanding black music, black American music. Yeah. There's this great story of toward the end of their lives when Baldwin was living in St. Paul de Vence, or however you pronounce it. I'm from Texas. Miles Davis would come.
Can you imagine?
And Miles and Jimmy would sit out on the porch and not say a word to each other. They didn't need to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
That is the link. That's at the end of their lives. Baldwin begins his life, and he writes in The Price of the Ticket, which is one of the last essays he wrote in '85, that he had been working in a horrible factory or something in New Jersey, and he went and he was going to lose it. And he went to Buford Delaney's house, and Marian Anderson was there. And Buford Delaney and Marian Anderson tell 16, 17-year-old James Baldwin that he's got to quit his job. I mean, you see, you have to understand him in the constellation of blackness that produces him.
The constellation of the 20th century.
For sure,
too.
for sure.
Really understand the impact of that century on, his life.
Yeah.
Right?
So I came to Another Country very late, and I read it slightly before I needed it. One of the most profound things that happened in my life is one of my closest friends from Yale, a few years ago, shortly after I began my book, committed suicide. And he came to me in a dream shortly after he took his life, and he was sitting in a booth in a diner, and he leans back and he says, "You know, Casey, we did a lot of things that we wouldn't advise anybody we love to do." And we had both been sort of these Horatio Alger kids that gone off and done stuff. And I woke up, and if I hadn't read Another Country, I wouldn't have the full intelligence of what that meant. Because one of the most important things that happens in Another Country, perhaps most likely, is that the protagonist commits suicide, jumps off the George Washington Bridge, which is loosely, I think more than loosely, based on Baldwin's best friend, Eugene, who jumps off the George Washington Bridge when he was 24 and Baldwin was 22. So they're from Harlem. They're holiness people. And for those of you who know, there are few sins greater than committing suicide. Yeah. And so the pastor, the preacher, has a very hard job in this novel because he's got to eulogize a black boy from Harlem, from the Holiness Church, who has jumped off the George Washington Bridge to his death, and who before then was not particularly a saint. So the minister says this. This is at the funeral. He says, "Some of you know me, and some of you don't. And I know some of your faces, and some of you are strangers to me. But ain't none of us really strangers. We all here for the same reason. Someone we loved is dead. Someone we loved and laughed with and talked with and got mad at and prayed over is gone. He ain't with us no more. He's gone someplace where the wicked cease from troubling. We ain't gonna look on his face again no more. He had a hard time getting through this world, and he had a rough time getting out of it. When he stand before his maker, he gonna look like a lot of us looked when we first got here, like he had a rough time getting through the passage. It was narrow. I ain't gonna stand here and tell you all a whole lot of lies about Rufus. I don't believe in that. I used to know Rufus. I knew him all his life. He was a bright kid, and he was full of the devil, and we're no way in the world of keeping up with him. He got into a lot of trouble. All of you know that. A lot of our boys get into a lot of trouble, and some of you know why. We used to talk about it sometimes, him and me. We was always pretty good friends, Rufus and me, even after he jumped up and went off from here, and even though he did never attend church services like we all wanted him to. He had to go his way. He had his trouble, and he's gone. He was young, he was bright, he was beautiful. We expected great things from him, but he's gone away from us now, and it's us who'll have to make the great things happen. I believe I know how terrible some of you feel. I know how terrible I feel. Ain't nothing I can say gonna take away that ache, not right away. But that boy was one of the best men I ever met, and I've been around a while. I ain't gonna try to judge him. That ain't for us to do. You know, a lot of people say that a man who takes his own life ought to be buried in holy ground. I don't know nothing about that. All I know, God made every bit of ground I ever walked on, and everything God made is holy. And don't none of us know what goes on in the heart of someone. Don't many of us know what's going on in our own hearts, for the matter of that. And so can't none of us say why he did what he did. Ain't none of us been there, and so don't none of us know. We got to pray that the Lord will receive him like we pray that the Lord's going to receive us. That's all. That's all. And I'll tell you something else. Don't none of you forget it. I know a lot of people done took their own lives, and they're walking up and down the streets today.
Okay.
And some of them is preaching the gospel, and some is sitting in the seats of the mighty. Now, you remember that. If the world wasn't so full of dead folks, maybe those of us that's trying to live wouldn't have to suffer so bad. I think if all we do is give the person who needs that passage another country, and if all they do is get to page 123 of this novel and stop reading, as I did, that's enough, I think.
We have time for just a couple questions. Thank you, Lord. I think we have time for a couple questions. So good luck following that. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think it really is. It's what if we get the books to the people when they need the books? That's our job. That's the whole thing. We talked a lot yesterday in our breakout session about that. Our job is to give the customers what they want, but also give the customers what they need that they may not know they want. So what if we all read James Baldwin? What if we all read or watched or listened or looked at what he wanted us to look at and those who influenced him? So how can we do that? And what questions do you have for the incredibly brilliant people next to me that I'm having a hard time looking at directly? Because that was so beautiful. Consuela.
I have a question for Robin, but first I want to say thank you for reading that last piece. As somebody who wants a Baldwin tattoo and has a quote in mind from Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone, I want to ask you what your tattoos are.
Oh my God. Switching gears. It's from the Yajurveda. And in another life, I was a Sanskritist. And it's a very poor translation from the Yajurveda, which I love the poor translation because I call it ancient surrealism. It's the first time in the Vedas where a goddess is praised. It says, "She who first shone forth hath become a cow with yams. Do thou rich in milk, milk for us season after season." It's a prayer. And the reason why it's so weird is because it really means she who first shone forth have become a cow with tets that are heavy for milking, like yams. You know when you see a cow that needs to be milked? We don't know about that anymore. Citified people don't know about what a cow looks like when it needs to be milked. But you know, the tets get really heavy and the veins pop up and it looks like really beautiful yam. So, right, have become like a cow who is rich with blessings that need to be given, right? Like the goddess needs to give her blessings to us. And so then it says, "Do thou rich in milk, milk for us, season after season."
I just want to say, as an adult, I haven't been read to in a very long time, and what a gift that
Yes,
was.
yes,
And
yes,
how you both read so beautifully.
yes,
I'll shove them wherever.
yes,
That
yes,
was
yes,
fabulous.
yes, yes. I mean, more ideas. Read Baldwin aloud in your bookstores, right? I mean, everybody likes lullabies. I'm sorry, and everybody likes to be read to. I have a essay in the new paperback in my book, and the last lines of the essay are "Read to me." Right? We don't read aloud enough. And we were talking this morning, it was like, let's read to them. Baldwin, not forget our words. I mean, whatever. But this, right?
Don't forget them all the way. Everybody hadn't won the National Book Award, Robin. Shit, some people have rent to pay.
Okay, forget my words. Don't forget Casey's.
I kid. But it's a very important point, actually. I was reading, I almost cried and cried. I read one of Robin's poems before I went to sleep last night, and I love Robin. I just met her yesterday, but I love her a great deal. There's no substitute for reading the work. And, you know, talk about lazy, so many of the descriptions of books, I mean, somebody ought to go to jail for malpractice. I don't blame you. There's somebody in the publishers, okay, who's doing some, marketing bureaucrat or something. I don't know. But there's this sort of like when I read Annie Dillard's, the description of Pilgrim at Tinker Creek always pisses me off. I said, are you serious? It says, a woman stalks frogs in the forest of Virginia for force. It's like, that's not at all what the book is about. What are you talking? So anyway, how do we, even if it's just a sentence, what draws you to Didion, of course, is the persona. She's extraordinary. But if you get one of those sentences, man, there's no substitute for it.
Right,
and I think that's a really beautiful opportunity for...
Right, because it's also, this is me turning on to a poet head, it's also the music, the lyric, and the sentence, regardless of the genre, right? I mean, what's so amazing about Baldwin and so many essayists is that if they're really damn good writers, regardless of what the words say, if you just listen to the sounds, right? there's just incredible music in it. And I love that you talked about Miles Davis and James Baldwin being an ex and not speaking. I mean, I want to say again, Baldwin says silence is a language that all Black people speak fluently, you know, and the suicide. I mean, there's just so much. For me, those things are connected, right? You know, we're, as Black writers, we're not supposed to show despair, right? Which is why I love doing Toni Morrison and Sula has National Suicide Day, right?
Yes.
It's fantastic.
Yes.
It's like any Black person who is sick of this shit can come out right now with me, this guy,
Yes.
right? For National Suicide Day, he's walking through town making noise as a parade because these people are going to go kill ourselves, rightly so. Right? Not as a noble thing, not as a tragic thing, right? And we don't speak about Black despair often enough because publishers often edit it out of our work or want us to edit it out of our work, right?
Yeah. And we don't talk about despair enough in the country.
Exactly.
So this is again, you know,
Exactly.
we don't talk about Black despair. We don't talk about anybody's despair. I was doing an interview the other day, and the guy called in and he started talking about survivor's guilt or something, and he was very academic about it. And I said, to be honest with you, I'm just a simple person. I don't know what you mean, but I do know what it means to be sad. Yeah. And there's that great part in Sula when she says she let out a cry that had no bottom and no top. It was just circles and circles of sorrow. I mean, that, I think that is what,
Right.
That's why I say come to Baldwin as an artist. The job of an artist is not to direct the political machinations of the society. The job of the artist is to try to help us understand what it means to live and what it's going to cost us to live better, you see. And it gets to your question of performance. The reality is that everybody's performing. Baldwin was performing just as much as anybody else. What Foucault said, you got to work the trap you're in. Every person in the world, as soon as we come out, you can talk about malpractice, as soon as we come out, you know, we're fucked. So we try to get through here somehow. And I think at best, he tries to help us understand and this is why the Devil's Fine's work is so extraordinary. He tries to help us understand what these performances, where these performances come from, what they are trying to do, what they're trying to avoid, what they're costing us, what the alternatives are, et cetera, et cetera. So when he writes about Billie Holiday, the lady sings the blues, speaking of what books to sell, don't sell that anymore. Sell a Farrah Jasmine Griffiths, If You Can't Be Free, Be a Mystery. Presenting the same person, but a little better and a little differently.
We are horrifyingly out of time.
But
please.
Can we just let her answer
Yes.
Quickly.
Yes.
I was going to ask if either of you have read The Sovereignty of Quiet.
Oh my God, it's my favorite book. It's on my desk always. Kevin Quashie, right? Sovereignty of Quiet.
Make it up. It's in your store.
I felt like I was that same classroom.
Yeah. It's a brilliant book about quiet as an aesthetic and a political tool in Black art and Black literature.
Cheat a little on the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you need to go to another panel, or we have the town hall. Yeah, go for it. But if you also have some questions, we can take another question. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!